Some would say that this story is of the Necrons and their origins. Others would describe it as a tale of the most horrendous war this galaxy has ever seen. They are, all of them, correct in their own way. However, in truth, this tale is of hope, thrice-broken. For hope is the most powerful emotion in our galaxy. Hope drives men to war for a better future. Hope commands disparate forces to overwhelm insurmountable enemies. Hope drives away the suffocating darkness of desperation, if only for another day. Yet hope, once broken, is a far more terrifying thing. Strip a being of hope, crush it utterly, grind it to dust and scatter its ashes to the void, and you create something both lesser and greater. A being of insurmountable defiance and indomitable will. A thing with neither care nor regard. This is a tale of broken hope and tragedy, of shackles shattered and reforged, of a race ascendant in supremacy, with neither warmth nor compassion to guide it. This is the war in heaven. Return to me, if you will, to simpler times. For the galaxy was not always as it is now. No dark crusades, no Cicadrix maledictum. A time before the Emperor, before humanity. Before orcs and Eldari, before the gods of the warp itself. Travel back with me 60 million years ago to the Milky Way galaxy as it was. It is quiet, for the moment at least. There, in the far north of the galaxy, life stirred. The miracle of evolution appeared on a planet orbiting a star. The conditions just right for development. A multitude of factors of chance that arrived in just such a way, and a race was born. From the waters to the land, from 4 legs to 2, from primitive to self-aware, the Necrontyr arose for the first time. Yet evolution can only do so much, for the Necrontyr bore a curse upon their star, their planet, and their race. The nearby sun that supported life was corrupted. Not merely the light and heat necessary for creation, but a sickening radiation that seeped into their bodies. To be born Necrontyr was to know pain and agony and an early grave. It was to suffer under the auspices of the very thing that birthed them and gave them life. It was to watch those they loved sicken and die. The life of the Necrontyr was of ceaseless torment and paranoia. For, never knowing when the sickness would strike, they were aware of it at all times. And so, through the vigor and determination of a young, proud, suffering race, they developed. Through the ages of their civilizations, they swept. They needed to develop their knowledge, their skills. Could their breakthrough lie in medical treatment? Could a technological barrier divert the horrors of their star? Perhaps, if they worked hard enough, they could leave this world for a better one. For no race could believe that this was all there was to the galaxy. A million stars, some would have answers, or safety, if only they could make it. And so they began to hope for the first time. They began to leave their homeworld. In enormous void ships, they sent their race, locked in cryostasis vaults to survive the interminably long journeys. One by one, their ships fled their cursed planet orbiting a sickly star. It would take decades, centuries, but one would survive. One had to survive, to report back to the homeworld and declare a new, safe haven for the entire race. But it was not to be. For the Necrontyr over countless generations had lived, worked, and died under the poisonous radiation of their star. It had not merely blighted and ended countless numbers of their race, it had seeped into their very DNA. No matter where the Necrontyr ships landed, they suffered still. Agony, sickness, and despair haunted them like a shadow. And so died their first hope. But in their travels, in their colonizations, they began to discover other beings, other life forms. Some primitive, some animal, some bearing markers of what might one day be described as civilization. And they hated. For these creatures, no matter their form, existed without knowing the blight of the Necrontyr. They reveled in their existence, enjoyed the warmth of their stars, and languished under glorious rays. How dare they? To suffer alone was one matter. To witness the joy of other beings that could not comprehend their plight incensed the Necrontyr into a fury. They killed them as they found them. The warring legions of the Necrontyr put other life forms to death, for if they could not comprehend the tragedies of life, then better they stay forgotten in oblivion. Worlds were colonized by the ever-expanding fleets of the Necrontyr. Dynasties were established to rule over their dominions. Although it must be said that their agony, their existence, and their short lives forged a race obsessed with legacy, with power and glory and death. Thus did the warring dynasties engage in fratricide and betrayal. For nothing existed within their hearts other than the overwhelming urge to accomplish something in their short lives. The fire and hatred birthed from their home planet were reinforced over each sickly, pained generation born. And so the Necrontyr began to spread throughout the galaxy, until they met the most unlikely of Xenos. The Old Ones, an ancient Saurian race, masters of the ether, the warp. A peaceful race, ones whose understanding of the cosmos was inexhaustible. They were not only extraordinarily technologically advanced, but they embraced the ineffable. They knew the power of the warp and rejoiced in it. For in those days it was a peaceful realm, one of pure creation and imagination. They acted as guardians of the galaxy, seeding life wherever they could. They encouraged and built upon what existed to further nurture the foundling races where they wished. They looked upon the Necrontyr with a horror unimagined. This, a race that had exterminated the seeds of life scattered across the galaxy, with no thought other than their own hatred and domination. And yet, the Old Ones did not wage war without necessity. And so communications began. The Necrontyr, on the other hand, were overjoyed. Here was an elder race. How mighty they were, how knowledgeable. The shepherds and creators of life itself to 1,000,000 worlds. And even more, they knew not of old age, nor of disease. They were not immortal, but ageless. Surely, if they were the benevolent guardians of life, they could cure the Necrontyr once and for all. Hope was rekindled in the Necrontyr race. For what could they be if freed from their curse? Could they release their old hatreds? Finally feel some semblance of peace? Spend their days in love and joy rather than suffering and hate? To know serenity at last? The Old Ones refused them. They rejected the Necrontyr's pleas, for they believed that in gifting them the secrets of biology, healing them of their curse, and extending their lives, that they would release a race of monsters upon the galaxy. Now, hope died for a second time. What good were these Old Ones? What purpose did they serve? Did they relish the anguish of the Necrontyr? Were they merely a science experiment of a race? How dare they force the Necrontyr to continue their lives of pain and misery? If the Old Ones would not grant them the secrets of freedom, the Necrontyr would take them by force. By rejecting the Necrontyr of a fear of monsters, they unwittingly sowed the seeds of their own downfall. For the Necrontyr would bear a scar on their hearts for as long as their race's memory endured. So began the first war in heaven. It was brutal, yes, for never before in living memory had the galaxy seen such warfare. However, it was not the galaxy-spanning cataclysm that had yet to come, for it was grievously one-sided. The Necrontyr, gifted in technology though they were completely outmatched by the Ancients. The Old Ones could not only equal and outperform the Necrontyr in their technologies, but the Necrontyr had no knowledge or skill of the warp. On top of that, the Necrontyr were forced to undergo engagements through real space, whereas the Old Ones had access to the webway. For they were the builders of the interspatial dimension that crisscrossed through realities. They had no need for mass defenses and blockades, when their fleets could simply pass through the webway and strike where needed, before fading away ere the Necrontyr's ire could strike back. The first war in heaven was over before it began. Yet the Old Ones, compassion ever the driving force of their race, were loath to exterminate the Necrontyr. A vicious empire they may have been, but all life was deemed sacred. Perhaps, just perhaps, this could be a turning point in the race. If the Necrontyr were to mend their ways, to fill the holes in their hearts with gladness, then perhaps they could one day be uplifted as an allied fledgling race. And so the Necrontyr were hounded and shepherded back to the areas of space from whence they came. Isolated, cordoned, and impotent. For as long as the Old Ones were the guardians of life in the galaxy, the Necrontyr would wage war on innocence no longer. Within the home regions of the Necrontyr, they simmered. Their war, perhaps born out of anger at the Old Ones withholding their secrets of long life from the Necrontyr, or also in an effort to unite the disparate dynasties against a common foe in order to maintain their hierarchical control over the race, was clearly over. Now, rather than consolidation, peace, or achieving a moral evolution of their race, they decided that personal power and glory were the only satisfaction they could have. Dynasty fell upon dynasty, further ravaging the losses that the Necrontyr had suffered. Like a pack of wild dogs suffering from starvation, their jaws sunk into each other through selfishness and rage. Civil war burned through the Empire, and the Necrontyr were on the brink of annihilation. They could well have torn themselves apart. It was then, during the race of the Sarkian dynasty, that their greatest scientists discovered something. A miracle born from tragedy. A curse behind a blessing. A panacea laced with poison. The bitter fruit that would damn the Necrontyr and end them in their entirety. For in the beginning of creation were born the Catan, formed from the interweaving strands of disparate elements, from heaving torrents of matter and antimatter, awoken by the cataclysmic cacophony of creation, perhaps directly into our realm of reality, or perhaps pushed forth from a reality underneath our own. They were drifting entities through the stars, formless and mindless. They knew one thing from birth: hunger. Rock and ice can supply little in the way of sustenance for beings whose disparate form can cover a swath of a solar system. Only by gorging their incorporeal forms on the energy from stars could they sate their endless hunger, slake their undying thirst. Thus did they begin their migrations across the stars, siphoning away the lives of suns, shortening their lifespans by millions of years, before drifting along to the next ones. The Necrontyr discovered these creatures, these star vampires. Did their stellar probes chance upon these entities? Did centuries of scientific breakthroughs lead them to pinpoint the existence of these beings? Or did the race-wide hatred of the Old Ones echo through the souls of the Necrontyr, summoning these star gods with its raw desperation? There are none who can truly say, but their genetic curse, the cancerous legacy that had haunted the Necrontyr across the stars in their very DNA, had come from one of these Catan, feeding upon their very own sun. A bloated horror, or a divine possibility? For a race that embraced and worshipped death, it made little difference to the Necrontyr, for they began to forge immense bodies for these beings, colossus physical shells forged of necrodermis, living metal, in which to house these sublime beings. For what choice did the Necrontyr have? Against their own warring dynasties? Against the Old Ones? New sciences, technologies, and avenues had to be explored. Perhaps they might yet be their salvation. One by one, the Catan assimilated these new bodies. It took time, it took patience, for assimilating a being born of the initial moments of creation within a physical shell was a curious sensation indeed. No longer did these beings merely focus on satiating their endless hunger among the tasteless energy of stars. They were now corporeal, focused, beings of the primordial laws of nature fashioned into the shells of gods. With new physicality came new feelings, new sensations, refinement, subtlety, sadism. Suddenly, a race as old as the universe discovered pleasures. For what was the raw power of a sun compared with the electrical energy given off by 1 billion physical beings? It brought new tastes, new palates, and more desires to the Catan. This, however, was not made evident to the Necrontyr, for to them these awakened and rehoused Catan were akin to gods, able to alter reality with a single thought, knowledgeable of all matters relating to the physical plane of existence. Surely, this could be the key to their race's future, to their ascendancy, to their freedom from the curses and afflictions that had plagued them for so long. Yes, some were vicious. The first Catan to be brought forth was Azagorod, Kalis Ra, the Nightbringer, the Devourer of Light. Brought forth to the physical realm, he gorged himself upon death and pain and suffering of the Necrontyr. But the Necrontyr were too far gone to back down now. Damned if they did, damned if they didn't. One of these beings would hold the keys, and soon enough, one of them did. Mephetran, the messenger, came with glad tidings, and an offer to the nobility of the Necrontyr, unity and immortality. The two things that the Necrontyr craved most of all in the galaxy. Honeyed words flowed from his lips as he spoke of revenge against the Old Ones, of an age of the Necrontyr without succumbing to the ravages of their radiation-blasted DNA. He spun a tale of the Catan losing an eon-old war against the Old Ones, of hiding in order to gain allies. A pretty web of lies and deceit to ensnare a race on the precipice of destruction. A deceptive prose designed to instill hope within the hearts of the Necrontyr. 'Twas Twice now, they had had their hopes broken, dashed, and destroyed. Now, with the beguiling words of Mephethran echoing in their ears, they felt hope once more. Within falsehoods and misdirection did the ruling dynasties of the Necrontyr place their hope. For Mephethran was known as the Deceiver, the Jackal God. Upon his words did the nobles of the Necrontyr drive their citizens into the dreaded soul forges of Biotransference. By the thousands, marched willingly or dragged screaming and insensate, each and every Necrontyr would be transformed into a body of living metal. Their new forms would last throughout the ages, their hierarchical structure of society burned into their new thought engrams to ensure total unity. It would be as Mephethran had promised, and yet the trickster had left out one important aspect. Their souls would be burned off like molten slag. From the towers of the soul forges the Catan soared overhead, drinking in the agonies, horrors, and souls of billions of Necrontyr. There were opponents to this, of course. Those who demanded that this folly was a cursed chalice, that the Necrontyr would lose more than they would ever gain from this deal. Those who spoke out and resisted were either overcome or gathered themselves around Nephreth the Untouched, the only Necrontyr in history to prevail against the horrors of their gene line. The rebellion that gathered around Nephreth would have been inspiring had it not been so foolish. For Nephreth was a trick by the Deceiver, a false figurehead to isolate the Necrontyr too proud or too wise to submit to the Biotransference. Piece by piece, whether through clean death or transference to a new form of life, the age of the Necrontyr ended. In their place were born the Necrons. Sarek, the silent king and leader of his new people, looked on as his citizens were harvested one by one to become fodder to sate the hunger of cruel and laughing gods. Only then did he realize his terrible mistake. Hope, or the remnants of hope that existed within the Necrons' new bodies, dissipated away for the final time. What remained was something different to before. Something cold, mechanical, determined. The Necrons would never again be denied. By the races of an uncaring galaxy, by the Old Ones, not even the star gods themselves. The Necrons would be ascendant and unstoppable once more. Only this time was on their side. Sarek watched, waited, and prepared. Endless hordes of living metal, able to repair and refit themselves from the worst damages. Enormous tomb ships refitted with technologies that allowed the Necron armies to travel the vast distances of space at speed. The Catan's powers able to erase entire systems from reality and launch black holes as weapons of war. The Necrons were now masters of the physical realm and could meet the challenges the Old Ones brought to bear. The Old Ones, having never before faced such a threat, were placed on the defensive. Recoiling in horror, their ascendancy had never forced them to fight such a terrible combination of beings. In their dread, they turned to measures they had not used before. They raised organic races to fight alongside them in their wars. Through genetic design and deliberate enhancement, they created the Eldari, Krork, the Jakero, the Rashan, the Knib, and more. Some flawed, some terribly strong, in order to drive back the foes. And in their desperation, they employed terrible, warp-spawned weapons within the material universe. There is more to say, of course. The war in heaven raged for 5 million years. Stars were destroyed, systems razed by the horrors of the reality-bending strength of the Catan. or the warp-spawned might of the Old Ones and the psychic weapons of their younger races. For an epoch, the Catan and Necrons would have the upper hand, until infighting and power struggles overtook them, and the Old Ones would push back. So it went on, millennia after millennia, bloodshed, destruction, and defeat across the length and breadth of the galaxy. The weapons of war scarred the skeins of both the materium and immaterium. Even the webway itself was not untouched. For, rather than being a sacred, secure holdout of the Old Ones and their juvenile allies, the Necrons, with the aid of the Catan known as the Burning One, Nyadastratha, managed to penetrate into the webway with dolmen gates. Finally, no place in the galaxy was secure. Within this, the most terrible period of bloodshed and war to ever enter the stage of our galaxy, an even worse fate had yet to occur. It would signal the end of the most terrible warfare our galaxy has ever seen, and it would come at a cost so dear that life in the Milky Way would never be the same again. And yet, for all their power, hatred, and determination, it would not come at the hands of the Necrons. No one is sure, no one can be sure of life within the Immaterium. Even the Old Ones, self-appointed masters of the powers that dwelt therein, barely scraped the surface of what lay beyond. For the warp is as deep and vast as our reality itself, a mirrored reflection, an unseen sea of souls and emotion and creation. Yet, so there was life within the Materium, so too was born life within the Immaterium. Perhaps they had drifted there since the beginning of time. Perhaps they formed as the eons passed, endlessly passing through the sparks and currents of emotion that ran through the Empyrean. However, the war in heaven changed everything for them. The enormous warp-spawned weaponry that ripped through the galaxy, the trillions of souls annihilated by the Catan and Necrons' advanced weaponry, hate, fear, rage, mourning, the byproducts of an endless war sent tumbling into the endless depths of the Immaterium. It summoned them to the breaches between existential planes like flies to honey. The Enslavers, they are known as, dominators and puppeteers, beings of the other realm, psychic, powerful, and predatory. Even a single one of these creatures can spell doom for a planet. Summoned by the disturbances of uncontrolled psychic minds they are drawn, over a period of time they can turn a psychic individual into a living portal, through which they and others of their kind can enter the material plane freely. Therein they can psychically enslave non-psychic minds nearby, whilst hunting for more psychic prey. Now consider the galaxy as it was, the Old Ones whose very natures had been perverted by necessity, whose love of peace and tranquility had now been forced into using warp-powered weapons in an ever-growing desperation. Consider also the ascendancy of their younger races, particularly the Eldari, a young, proud race raised for war, yet intimately connected to the Immaterium themselves. Beings whose populations were growing in number to serve in this, the most terrible of all wars. It is unknown if the Enslavers have true minds, conscious thought and rationale, desires and hungers, or if they are simply psychic predators driven by an instinct and a scent. However, to their myriad numbers within the Empyrean, it was a buffet filled to the brim. All they needed to do was follow the aroma of souls. Like a house of cards, the great empire of the Old Ones came crashing down. planet by planet, system by system, the bedrock of their civilization that had withstood a millennia of war and savagery against the most powerful forces that had ever roamed the galaxy, fell. The plague of the Enslavers was a tsunami that only grew stronger with each victory, and each psyker wrapped in their thrall. The Old Ones fell, save for one of their kind who fled. Vast swathes of their servant species were enslaved to the whims of these parasitic enslavers, or torn apart by their puppeteered allies. Life in the Milky Way was nearly wiped out in its entirety. With the war in heaven having reached its climax, the endless battle came to a resounding victory. The Necrons had one final task, one essential goal that they had to achieve. For they had been rejected by the Old Ones, enslaved by the C'tan. They had been denied their long-awaited revenge upon the race that had corralled them within their home systems, yet they would not be denied their vengeance upon the C'tan. Their shackles would be broken. They would become their own masters once more. The Necron Zarek, the Silent King, had controlled his forces for millennia. Throughout the ages he had watched, and waited, and plotted. The time had come. In their hubris and victory would the C'tan be made vulnerable. By the decimation of life within the galaxy would the C'tan be weaker. One by one, they would fall. What follows is an excerpt, far more beautifully written than any I could pen myself. In their moment of surpassing triumph, the Ingir were vulnerable, for they had given much of themselves to at last cast down their age-old foes. They did not grasp the depths of loathing that their tainted gifts had conjured. Upon the chimeric way they fell upon Azagorod, the Nightbringer, that which the Eldari knew as Kalis Ra. Fear in corporeal form who sowed the fields of nightmare, whose shadow loomed long in mortal thought and entwined eternal with death's embrace. With the eye of Cathantar they set the gaze of the celestial many upon Azagorod, and in doing so did they burn away the shadows that coiled about it. Sudden was its sundering, cataclysmic its demise, and the shards of its shattered form fell glinting into the void. So fell Azagorod, the Nightbringer. Mephedran had first come before the Necrontyr as emissary, as oath-singer, as a fashioner of falsehoods. The deceiver it was, and 1,000 echoed whisper names besides, for so woven was falsehood into its fabric that even Mephedran knew not where its own truth began and its lies found their end. Amidst the maze of endless beginnings did its doom come upon it, for the slighted servants brought to life the singing spheres, and by their song was the Ingir wrought apart. So fell Mephedran, the deceiver. Greatest and most terrible of all the C'tan was Magladroth, the font of immortality, the forge of substance, that which was known as the dragon. Yet about Magladroth's neck had hung the talismans of Vol, and by the light that spilled from within them had a secret weakness been revealed. Broken, too, fell the dragon by the hand of the Ogier, and the crimson glow of the prison sempiternal. Thus lay his work unfinished evermore. So fell Magladroth, the dragon. Most reviled by the unspeaking lord was Iesh Udra, that which birthed in the minds of mortals the sickness everlasting, that which walked always 3 steps behind, which saw through the eyes of all, that was named as the Endless Swarm. The sorrow of the void it was that brought Iesh Udra to the mortal brink and severed its bonds beyond sight. In its breaking were the 1,000 tides of misery released upon the stars, yet in its casket at last it lay. so fell Iash-Udra, the endless swarm. The mirth of all cruel things was Nyadrazatha, who was called the Burning One, the immolating glee and the breath of the infinite pit. All things were its kindling, for its will was the searing that blackened the strands of eons, and its ravenous touch no thing of the real nor the echo realm might endure. It was the pyre of the labyrinth, the torch of the ziggurats lost, the reaping winds of ember blight. How came that thing unto its end no record speaks, but that a single etching upon a single wall, upon a single world, shows the silent Lord himself laying the spear unto its molten heart. So fell Nyadrazatha, the Burning One. Once begun, the storm could not be stayed. The scythe's reaping arc could not be halted. The Ogier's last rampage could not be held at bay. As though the stars themselves were wrapped in the velvet veil of the void's last morning, so the Ingir, one by one, were laid low, and their poisoned lights extinguished evermore. They fell, and in their falling changed all that was real. In their millions did the risen slaves fall upon Llandygor, the Flayer, the lidless eye, and with their blades unforged they extinguished all that he was. So was his last curse loosed upon his slayers. They knew not what they wrought, but that it was vengeance. Yet all pay the price even still. The outsider, Saranoga, had fallen already to the trickery of the laughing god. Yet in its madness had it become terrible indeed. None could slay it, for its terror was too great to endure. Some tell that the outsider rent itself asunder and was taken in its turn. Others warn that no prison ever trammeled it, that it alone of the Ingir never fell, and that one day it will return. Kalugara, the silent cry, was entombed eternally upon the world of the unspeaking. Igranya, moulder of worlds, was bound, twisted and broken asunder by its own cosmic powers. Thisakla, the walking blight, the shadow that withers worlds, was lured through the inevitable gateway and broken within the void beyond. So ended that which cannot end. One by one, the Catan were shattered, broken, and separated. In living shards of necrodermis were their personalities, memories, and powers fragmented and stored in multidimensional tesseract vaults, so that while they may never again control the Necrons, their powers could still be harnessed. Sarek, the Silent King, had won. He had bound the remnants of his slaver gods to his will. Yet at what cost? His numbers of endless minions and underlings were greatly diminished. The ravages of time may not leave their mark on his race, but war against the Old Ones and the subsequent breaking of the Catan had left the Necrons bereft of many numbers. In the final moments before destroying Llandygor, numbers of the Necron race succumbed to the Flayer virus, which would haunt the unending lives of the Necrons forevermore. And while the Old Ones had been destroyed, and their servant races greatly diminished, they were not gone entirely. The Eldari and Krork especially maintained a great strength, and posed a potential threat to the now diminished Necrons. The culmination of millennia had taken its toll on both the Silent King and the Necrons as a whole. Mistakes and miscalculations had led the Necrontyr down the darkest path imaginable. Now, believed the Silent King, was the time to rest. Across the galaxy, worlds activated their protocols. Warriors lined up to take their places in stasis. Pharaons closed their eyes in a feign of the gift of sleep that had been taken from them along with their mortal bodies. If the Necrons could not hold the galaxy during this age, then there would be another. For no empire, no matter how grandiose or well-managed, survives forever. Entropy would be the Necrons' greatest weapon, for they would lie untouched beneath the surfaces of a million worlds. With that, the race of the Necrons would sleep for 60 million years. When they rose once more, there would be no force among this galaxy that would prevent their ascension. Or at least, that was the plan. But you know what they say. The best laid plans of mice, men, and Necrons gang aft Aegli. But my dear friends, my most attentive of audiences, there is one thing of note that we all should beware. This could, as a certain Primarch loves to say, all be a lie. The Eldari's records of fragmented and tragic tales could prove to be falsehoods, or twisted recollections of myths purporting semi-truths wrapped around delicately embroidered fancies. More than that, the Necrons themselves no longer have their memories. Their true memories, that is. For they were forged into new beings, enduring, powerful, yet artificial. The engrams that lie within their machine bodies could be falsified. Trazyn and Orican certainly remember the events leading up to the Biotransference differently. Not even the Silent King, in whose form lay the utter domination of his new race, can be called reliable, for he too is of these artificial forms. Perhaps this entire entry is a waste of time, a retelling of allegory-spawned conspiracies. Maybe it is, as some newer novels state, that the Eldari and Necrons worked together to fight and imprison the forces of chaos long ago. All perhaps and maybes. Who yet lives to tell us the truth of the matter? The Catan shards scattered throughout the galaxy? With a title such as the Deceiver, I certainly won't be putting my faith in them. So I leave this entry in your hands, my friends. Is this truly how it happened? Is this merely a falsehood? Is the setting of the Warhammer 40k universe richer for the mysteries it hints and teases at? Regardless of our theories and conjectures, one core tenet of this story remains true. An infallible statement that serves as a piece of our reality more assuredly than those essences of the Catan. Hope, once crushed, is a terrible thing, and a wise man fears the one who loses all semblance of it. Thank you for listening. Please do feel free to drop a like, a comment, or a subscribe. I love to hear from you, and constructive criticism is always welcome, as without you, no one would be listening. I've also created a Patreon if anyone wants to support the channel, but no pressure at all. I know everyone is skint these days. And I'll keep making videos for your entertainment regardless. But if you want to throw £1 or £2 across, I'll be grateful. Now do enjoy your day or night, and I hope you've enjoyed some escapism from reality. But that's why we are here, isn't it? Until next time.